You know, if I told you once, I told you a billion times, you just shouldn't exaggerate. And I do exaggerate sometimes, and I wanted to come up with an illustration of going to extremes, and I kept thinking of some from my life, and I thought that will do nothing more than get me in huge trouble. So I decided I'll go to another person that you may have heard of. This would have happened about 15 years ago. There's a guy named Albert Bell. I don't know if anybody remembers him or not, but he used to be with the Cleveland Indians. He was kind of good. He was very good as a baseball player, but not in a lot of other ways. But he was a very, very good baseball player. And I'm thinking about going to extremes, okay? A bunch of kids show up on Mischief Night or whatever you call it around here, and right before Halloween, and they decide, there's Albert Bell's house, let's egg it. And so, yeah, that's always a fun thing to do, except for at our place. It's, you know, you do that sometimes. And so they're going to egg Albert Bell's house. And, of course, Albert Bell does what you would expect him to do. No, he didn't call the police. No, he didn't say, hey, you kids, get out of here. No, he didn't do any of that. He got in his SUV four-wheel drive, and he tried to run them over. So that's, I think, maybe going to extreme a little bit. Well, if you think that's extreme, come back to the story from the life of Elisha that we've been going through. This is found at the very end of 2 Kings chapter 3. And I'll bring you up to date on where we were. But this is going to extreme. Trust me on that one. Now, to just tell you where we were, I'll take you back to last Sunday and bring you back up to par here. But Israel was not in a safe place at that time. Remember, there was the tribes of Israel, the tribes of Judah. They had split. You know, families do that sometimes. They have trouble and they split. They were getting big and they split up and they had differences. And Israel had a king at that moment. His name was Ahab. Wasn't too good. It really was a disaster. He worshiped Baal, made it the national religion of Israel. Man, that just blows your mind. But anyhow, good news, Ahab died. Happened a long time ago, so you don't need to grieve, but he died, and that was good. He's out of the picture, and now his son, Jehoram, is going to take his place. Well, you know, as a king, you go out and you take over territories, and you expand your borders, and you do all that kind of stuff, and you pad your coffers a little bit. And he had done that with Moab. He got Moab, he took over Moab, and he brought them under, Ahab did. And he made them give him every year or every so often, had to give the 100,000 lambs, and he took all the wool off of 100,000 rams. And so all that stuff got sent to Ahab. Ahab died, and the king of Moab, King Mesha, now says, you know what? Ahab's no longer on the scene. His son Jehoram's taken over. I'm not going to do this for Jehoram. If he wants that stuff, he's going to have to come get it. I'm not giving it to him. He's going to have to come and fight our forces. I'm tired of being kicked around like this. So he's going to not do that. Well, Jehoram says, what do I do now? Moab's rebelling. What am I going to do? So he contacts King Jehoshaphat, who was over the tribes of Judah, and King Jehoshaphat is willing to jump in and do whatever Jehoram, that's why I call him Jump In Jehoshaphat, but he was willing to jump in and do whatever Jehoram wanted to do, and so he's going to help take over and go in, and we're going to fight Moab. We're big, we're bad, let's go fight Moab. So they're going to do that. And Jehoram says to Jehoshaphat, which way would we go? We can go to the north. We got to go through a little mini Grand Canyon, and there's military waiting for us. We can go to the north, or we can go to the south, which is just, you know, through the desert, and we'll tag team with the king of Edom, and we'll come up and we'll fight them down there. We'll catch them by surprise. They'll never know we were coming. And which way you want to go? And Jehoshaphat said, oh, let's go south. Let's just absolutely go south. No problem. Problem was, I suggested last week, that no one asked God. No, We do that. We all do that, don't we? We get ourselves in the middle of stuff and we never ask God what he wanted us to do. And then when we're in trouble, then we want to go back to God, which is exactly what they did. They decided, let's go down south, and they did. And they spent 7 days marching through desert. And I think I suggested I could do it for 7 minutes. I wouldn't want 7 days of this. But the entire armies of Judah and Israel, and when they get down there, they have to hook up with the king of Edom. They got to please him, whatever that cost. I don't know what that was, to get him to join. And let's go up and fight Moab. And in the meantime, the king Mesha of Moab says to all his people, they're going down south. We got to fight them off. Every able-bodied guy's got to go there. So they're grabbing clubs and sticks and stones and slingshots and weapons and anything they can do, and they're going to be fortified down south, ready for this big attack. In the meantime, they're marching through the desert, Israel and the tribes of Jacob, and they're marching, and they get down there, and they've depleted their food. They have absolutely no water. They're exhausted from all this stuff, and now they're like, uh-oh, why do we do this? And in verse 10, it tells you that they blame God. It's like, why did God make us do this? Why did God put us in this circumstance? Like, wait a minute, God had nothing to do with it. You did it. But it's good. It's nice that God will let us blame him every once in a while. So that's what they did. Jehoshaphat says, you know what? What we really need is somebody who can talk to God for us. We need a prophet of God. And it just so happened that on the trip, this guy named Elisha, who's a prophet of God, just happened to be in their midst. He was there. And by the way, God was there all the time. They just didn't resource him. They did their own thing. They got themselves in over their head. They were in big, huge trouble. Didn't depend on God. Didn't ask God an opinion. Didn't seek out him, whatever he wanted, a lot like what we do. And they were up over their head. And now it's time to go to God. Isn't it good that God tolerates us? Even when we goof up and mess up and go way beyond what we should have done, failed like crazy, and then we finally come to God, and he's still faithful, he's still just, he still forgives us, he still welcomes it, he still bails us out, he still cares. That's amazing. So if you remember, I mentioned last week that God came up with this wonderful plan, and what he said to do is, I know you're starving to death, I know you're exhausted beyond belief, I know your tongues are swollen and sticking to the roof of your mouth because you're thirsty, but here's what I want you to do. We're in the middle of this desert, it's gigantic desert. Just start digging ditches. Dig some ditches, real deep, make rows and rows of ditches, and let's see if tomorrow morning I fill it with water. What? Dick Goddard just said there's no rain on the forecast. He was there. He's that old, honest. There's nothing on the horizon. Does that take faith and trust? It's like, okay, Elisha, you're driving us nuts, but if that's what God said to do, we'll do it. So they dig the ditches and all that stuff. And the morning comes. I don't know how this happened. There's people who try to explain it naturally, some of the melting of the mountain stuff in Edom, and that it flowed down. God might have just filled it with water. I don't know. He's able to do that, by the way. But anyhow, they woke up the next morning and everything's filled with water. These ditches are full with clean drinking water, and they're going to be able to refresh themselves. In the meantime, the Moabites, who are lined up waiting to fight, they look out and they see the water out there, but from the direction they're at and the sun on it and the reflection and the soil, it's like, that looks like blood. That's blood in the ditches. Where did the blood come from? This is the Moabites misinterpreting it. And they said, I know what it was. Those silly Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and the guy from Edom, they finally fought it out. They were so desperate for food and water that they killed each other, and the valley's overflowing with their blood. Now's our chance. We can go in and rout them, which is what they try to do. And in the meantime, Israel, Judah, and Edom are all refreshed and ready to go, and the fight begins, and the good guys are mopping up. They're doing really good. They're killing the Moabites, and they wipe them out, and then they start marching north into this area, and they're just destroying everything in Moab. They're taking no prisoners, and they're destroying everything. And they get to the northern capital, a place called Kir Hareseth, and they come to an absolute halt. It's like stand still, battle time. We can't go any further. The reason why is now this town is 3,000 feet above sea level. They're going up, and it's got three sides of it is surrounded by valleys. The valleys drop down between 1,200 and 1,500 feet. That's a pretty good drop. That's a nice defense mechanism. If you're uphill, by the way, there's no reason why I know these things, but if you're in a battle, it's always better to be uphill than downhill. Throwing rocks downhill is a lot more exciting than throwing rocks uphill at somebody. More effective too, and so they're up above. The Moabites are up above, and besides that, they've got the city is walled. It's fortified. They've got walls all the way around. They are in a absolute, definite advantage place. And so let me read to you verses 25, 26, and 27 of chapter 3, just so you know what's going to happen. It says, when the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, now this is up here on the hill, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great. They withdrew and returned to their own land. Wow, 3 little verses. Kind of interesting verses. They really are. Mesha, the king there in Edom, decided that he needed to do some desperate actions. Mark, I'm not sure why, but it's not working again. So he attempted to do what was bold and brave. He took 700 of his best warriors, and he said, okay, down there, we got the king of Israel and his armies. We got the king of Judah and his armies. We got the king of Edom and his armies. What are we going to do? Let's attack the king of Edom. Now, there's no place in the Bible where it tells you why or anything like that. We would assume that he figured them to be the weakest link. And so that's where he was going to go. And he took his best soldiers, and they attacked the king of Edom. Maybe he thought that Edom's really not in this for their own purpose. They just jumped in. Maybe they'd be the ones who say, if it gets tough, we're leaving. We don't need to fight this battle. I don't know what he was thinking, but they attack him, and they fail. The king of Edom holds place and is successful, and things are getting really, really bad. So at this point, out of desperation, then he did what was brutish and barbaric. Terrible. What he did was he took his firstborn son and sacrificed him to die. So that's another point up there, Mark. Thank you. So he took his firstborn son, impaled him to the wall so everybody could see it, and then apparently set the wall on fire in worship to his own god, Chemosh. That's what he did. Now, that was the equivalent of Baal in their land. So he did that. That's a horrible. Can you imagine such a thing in public, in plain sight? And what he's doing is he's showing his people, but also his God, how desperate he is. He offered his son as a sacrifice to a god. That's terrible. That was considered in their day the most supreme act of devotion to your deity. You couldn't do anything more committed and devoted to your God than to take your son, your firstborn son. This is the one who was going to become king when Mesha was gone, and sacrifice him to God. Now, by the way, Our God, Jehovah God, the God of Israel and the God of Judah, prohibits that type of thing. He has said in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 31, he said in Micah chapter 6, 7, that this is an abomination. You cannot do such a thing. He doesn't want that at all. Now, there's two exceptions. One of them was in the life of Isaiah, when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, his only son. Now, he had another son, but it's that only begotten, his unique, special, promised of God's son. And he took him to the point where he was laid on the altar, the fire was about ready to be lit, and Abraham had that knife up in his hand and it was ready to come down, and God stopped him and said, "Do not do this. Now I know that you trust me, that you are a man who has faith in me, and that you will follow me." God stopped it. Man, that's such a horrible thought. Isn't it a horrible thought of sacrificing a child like that? And God stopped him. God, the other example, you know that. God gave his own son, Jesus, and he went through with it. He killed him on the cross, crucified him, so that he could pay for our sins. He did that, and as much as Jesus even prayed, "Lord, if it be your will, take this cup away from me. If there's any other way, let's do it." And then he said, "But you know what? This is our will. This is the will of God. This is the way it's going to happen, because my payment for sin, my dying and shedding my blood for sin, is the only way that people are going to escape the fires of hell. It's the only way it's going to happen. And so let's go for it," Jesus said. Let's do it. This is wonderful. This is a good plan, and I am on board to do this. I wish that when Mesha killed his son, that there could be a good end to that, but there's not. There's not a good end. His son died. He worshiped the false god, and I know God is merciful, but I don't have a lot of hope that I will see this young lad in heaven someday. I just don't have that. I would hope and pray for that be the case, but we don't know. What happens next is kind of interesting. Israel and Judah and Edom retreated. They turned around and ran. Now, I think in my notes I put they turned defeat for Moab into victory, but it probably would have sounded cuter if I said it turned sure victory and they stole it from the jaws of defeat. They had this thing won. They had just wiped out the entire nation, and the king was so desperate he killed his son, and who knows what was going to happen next. And all of a sudden they retreat. They run away. And you would say, wow, aren't we for Israel? And we are. We're for Israel. That's whose side we're on in this battle. But for Moab, they're taking a view that from now we are free from Israel's yoke. And that's going to last 200 years. No more giving them sheep. No more giving them ram's wool. Kind of interesting. Just a few years ago, 1868. In 1868, a German missionary named F.A. Klein was in that region and uncovered a black basalt stone. And when he found this, he knew this was very unique and very special. So he contacted a German museum back home, and he wrote down a few of the lines off of this, and he sent it back. And he said, you know, what is this? Is this important? Should I get this shipped back home? Well, in the meantime, some of the Arabs who were helping with the archaeological dig back in 1868 said to themselves, you know what? This thing's probably valuable. This thing's really special. We don't want this to go to Germany. We want this to stay here. How are we going to do that? So they came up with a really good idea. Let's break it into pieces, little tiny pieces, and then they'll give up on it, and then we'll glue it back together. And they did that. They broke it into little tiny pieces, and when they glued it back together, originally there were 1,100 lines tons of information originally. When they glued it back together, they were only able to come up with 669 lines. So they only got about 55, 60% of it put back together. But what they came up with was really kind of interesting because it was a tablet that was written by King Mesha of Moab. He had this thing inscribed in honor of this battle that we were just reading about. This is something he had written up, and he says that it was written by King Mesha, the son of Chemosh. That's his god. He is a follower of Chemosh, the god, the one he sacrificed his son to. And he says in this that he threw off the yoke of Jehovah's people. He is trash talking and celebrating that he beat God. And in a sense, he did. And he honored Chemosh. And in the end, he says that he triumphed over Ahab, even though Ahab was dead. But he also says that he beat his sons Ahaziah and Jehoram, and then he says, and defeated Israel utterly, who perished forever. Israel perished forever. Well, and from Mesha, that was probably true because he didn't have any problems, or at least the Moabites didn't have any problems for 200 years with Israel. So in his lifetime, it was forever. That was forever. What caused this sudden change? Well, the child sacrifice, of course, was significant. Now, by the way, more recent, 1987, a Ugarit cuneiform tablet was discovered that tells about the rules or the laws of the Canaanites and their holy wars. And it says that when they're under attack, they're supposed to pray to Baal and to supplement it with the sacrifice of a firstborn. And if they do all that, then Baal will drive the enemies from your gates. That was written in 1200 BC. That's 400 years prior to this little incident that we're reading about in 2 Kings. So the plan is, if you're under attack by enemies, pray to Baal. If that isn't enough, then sacrifice your firstborn, and that guarantees that Baal will chase the enemies away from your gate. And people practiced that for 400 years. In fact, in Carthage, they decided to go even farther. They sacrificed 200 of their most noble children and did it publicly in hopes that Baal would chase away their enemies. So why is it that this caused Israel to retreat? Well, the first one was maybe the sickening sight. Maybe it just stunned the armies. They were like shocked beyond belief. A lot of people, a lot of commentaries take that view, that it was such a grotesque thing to see him sacrifice his child and burn him on the wall that they said, oh, that's enough for us. We're leaving. This is crazy. We're not. And probably for you and I, that would have worked. I just think a hardened army that marched through the desert and then came up north through the land, killing people, men, women, and children, and burning down towns, I don't know that that would have done that much to them. Another reason possibly is that the Moabites were emboldened by this, and they said, all right, our king, he's really showing passion. He's doing something. Let's go get him. And everybody ran because, oh no, they're strong and they're powerful. Let's run. I think you might sense that I'm not buying that, but there's a lot of people believe that. So if you're one of them, that's fine. I'm just not absolutely convinced about that one. Another possibility is that the spiritually wavering Israelites had still had some affiliation and some belief, some commitment to Baal. Well, we know that's true because last week we saw earlier that Jehoram set aside some of the stuff of Baal, the worship of Baal, but he didn't get rid of it. He kind of kept it there just in case we need a good luck charm a little bit later. And maybe if this Jehovah thing doesn't work out, we can go back to Baal and maybe he'll bail us out. Well, anyhow, I don't know. But I think there is some truth to that. I think they were starting to waver and say, whoa, wait a minute. You know, do we follow Jehovah? Do we follow Baal? They got Chemosh, and look what they're doing. That's pretty extreme. I think we're going to back off on this one. Then another possibility, and I really like this one, is that the fury of God's wrath was against wayward Israel. I really think 3 and 4 there, combination of that is what was going on. I think God is punishing Israel for following other gods. And he's just saying to them, you know what, if you're going to do this, if you're going to waver, if you're going to play this spiritual God game with me, I'm not on your side. In fact, I'm going to bring it harder on you. And so for the next 200 years, they at least lost some of this wealth and leadership. The text itself says that there was fury. Fury is an interesting word. It means to break into pieces, fragments, shards, just like that one stone was broken into pieces, the same thing. And that's what happened to the nation of Israel. There was such great indignation against Israel for driving Meshach to this extreme. Israel fell apart. They were dispirited, maybe at the horrible sight, maybe at that god of Chemosh, maybe at their own Baal, maybe at their own Jehovah. But whatever happened, Moab gets the victory at the last moment. That's not the way you and I like stories to end. That's not the way we like to think about how God does things, but that's it. That's it. That's what happened in Israel on that day. They were down and out. They turned to God, and then they were up on a high, and they were winning, and then all of a sudden they were beaten down again. I think I had on the screen earlier in the announcement things a quote that David Roper said. Said, despite our defeats, nothing can separate us from the love of God. That's Romans 8. You know that. Verse 35. No matter what happens to us, nothing can separate us from God's love. That's a great, great promise. Adversity is our lot. We're going to have adversity. We're going to have trouble. But Romans 8 also says, in Christ, we are more than conquerors. We may look like we're losing, but we win. We win in the end. I always like Tony Evans, the black preacher in Dallas, who every once in a while when he gets really wired and fired up about preaching, and he's talking about something, and he'll say, folks, I read the end of the book. We win. It's great. We do win. We win. In the end, we're in heaven with God for eternity. That's it. We win. We're more than conquerors. And Roper goes on to say, we will taste defeat from time to time, but even so, we are loved with an everlasting love. Isn't that great? I used in the Sunday school today the 2 verses, the Psalm 55 verse, the 1 Peter 5 verse, both said the same thing. Cast your cares upon God because God cares for you. God is in it. He's in our midst. He's with us every moment of every day, and he cares about us. And he loves us with an everlasting love. We all fail. All of us fail. Jesus said the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That's probably your testimony. You want to do stuff. You want to do what's right. You want to do this. You want to do that. But we all fail. We're weak. But just like our good friend Winston Churchill said, we must never, never give up. Never give up. Because we're going to win. God has chosen us. We are his. We are his for better or for worse. He will not separate from us. He will not divorce us. He loves us. And he has much for us to do. He has a work for you and for me and for all of us to do individually and together. And we need to get on with it. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for the grace of Jesus Christ, for the grace that has saved us through his death on the cross and through our simple reception by faith of who he is and what he has done. Thank you for a grace that sustains us. Your grace is sufficient for our need. Thank you for that. God, today this is a horrible story. It's a horrible story. It's a terrible thing in the history of Israel, Moab and many other places. And we don't want to just diminish that, but we want to learn and say, Lord, it's amazing what you have done for us. God, you gave your son. That's unthinkable to us. But he came to rescue us, to save us from sin and to save us for eternity. Thank you for that gift. Help us to come to you, Lord, whatever our need, whatever is in our lives, whatever's going on, to give our hearts and our lives to Jesus Christ, who gave his life for us so that we could live for him and live with him for all eternity. Thank you. In the name of Jesus, amen.